Hello and welcome to Love from the Other Side. If you are on this video or this channel, perhaps you too are in need of hope. We bring you stories from around the world of people who have shared their near-death experiences. While you may not agree with everything they share, we do ask that all comments be kept respectful and kind. With that being said, let's get started with today's video. Our testimony today comes from Nancy, who experienced not one, but two near-death experiences within a matter of a few days following a bicycle accident in 2014. Here's what she had to say. In January of 2014, I experienced some things that promised to change my life forever. These experiences went from horribly terrifying and painful to profoundly beautiful and soul-stirring, all within the space of a few days. On the morning of January 3rd, 2014, while riding my bicycle here in town, I was struck broadside by a truck. My injuries were so severe that I am still in recovery from some of them. By all accounts, the doctors who treated me said I shouldn't have lived. Most people die from injuries like yours, my surgeon and primary care physician insist. They were right. I shouldn't have lived. In fact, I came very close to death twice during those first few days. During those brushes with death, I had two near-death experiences that promised to change the way I look at life, the way I experience life, and the way I feel about the concepts of God and Spirit. Before we go any further, let me say that I debated about putting this out there, but I realized it has to be right now. I feel in my heart that it is not good to hold on to this experience. At least one of my friends is soon facing the final transition, and I would hope this post, in some small way, helps her make peace with moving on to the afterlife. Also, I hope it helps others facing a similar situation. My first near-death experience happened when the truck initially struck me. In human time, the NDE lasted just a few minutes. As I was struck, I realized that my consciousness was in two places simultaneously. One part, very scared and animal-like, was firmly inside of my broken body that was stuck on the vehicle's axle and being dragged under the truck. The other part, very calm, dispassionate observer, hovered out in front of the truck and off to the south, watching the whole scene unfold from a distance. This dual consciousness seemed quite normal to the observer part of me. The observer was calm about the whole thing. I remembered the feeling that this was all happening for a reason and that there was nothing to fear. The observer, me, watched as witnesses stopped, called for help, and the paramedics arrived. When the paramedics started working on me, my two selves came back together. Once I was stabilized enough to move, they transported me to the nearest trauma hospital. It turned out that my head and spinal injuries were so severe that I needed surgery. My lower spine would need reconstruction, but only after the bleeding in my brain stabilized. In the meantime, the trauma team admitted me to the intensive care unit. I pondered that initial split consciousness experience for a few days while in ICU as I awaited surgery. I had no explanation for being in two places at the same time or for experiencing the accident from two different vantage points at once. In my scientific mind, I didn't know how consciousness could split apart with one part of me traveling outside of the body. Finally, I dismissed it as just an oddity of the crash and almost dying. It wasn't important, and it most certainly wasn't real, or so I thought. Perhaps because the first experience wasn't enough to get me thinking about spiritual matters, 3 days later in surgery, I was pulled right into the thick of things. I had another NDE, but this one was different. Instead of simply experiencing events unfold from outside of my body, my consciousness was ultimately brought to a place unlike anything I have ever experienced. The beauty and utter peace of the place defies human words. I felt totally calm, loved, and whole. I also felt a deep, profound sense of love permeating everything there. It was big love, as if the structure of this place was somehow made of love. Love was everywhere, because there was nowhere that wasn't love. I can't explain it any further than that. I already never wanted to leave this place. One woman greeted me, although she said she was in a form that she took at the time to make it easy for me to relate to her. She was a stranger to me, although I was somehow not a stranger to her. She moved with me through the landscape, telling me things that I and the rest of the world needed to remember. Things we'd forgotten or perhaps never learned. These things were reminders that would help us live a beautiful life on earth. She said she was a spokesperson for everyone in heaven. Somehow she was a conduit for the information I was being given, because if I met and communicated with everyone who wanted to speak with me, I would be overwhelmed. It felt as though we were together for days, even weeks. The amount of information she passed on to me was staggering. I am still processing it. But eventually she insisted it was time for me to go back to my life. The thought of that made me weep like a child. I didn't want to go back. Not now, not ever. This place was too beautiful and loving for me to want to leave. But she insisted that I had a life to live. It wasn't time for me to be here for good. I argued up and down and even yelled a few times. Can you imagine arguing with a being such as this? But I did. I argued and cried. I insisted I didn't want to go back to a broken body and all of the repercussions from this experience that awaited me. She watched me with what I felt was sadness, but she insisted that it was time for me to go back. As I opened my mouth to argue again, I was back in the surgical recovery room. I was confused, weeping, and already missing that place and the being who I'd met there. No, I am no longer atheist or agnostic, although at this point I don't want to put a label on what I am. I did have the good fortune to be shown spirit in a way that made me realize I can no longer deny it for myself. These experiences have opened my heart to all peoples, all faiths, and all beliefs in a way that I would not have thought possible. I will share a small bit of the first thing she taught me. We are primarily here to love, to practice love, to show love, to experience love. Hate is not the language of the Spirit, nor is fear. Love is. It is a love that has no strings or conditions. It is simply love in all of its forms. The first thing that I experienced was the beauty of heaven, both visually and in a feeling sense. When I was there, a landscape of gently rolling hills surrounded me. Flower-filled grassy meadows spread out on the hills around me. There were huge deciduous trees in full leaf. The trees were larger and grander than any here on earth and surrounded the meadows. There is the barest sense of a light mist, as if it were a humid summer morning, clung to the top of the trees. The sky showed a very light blue, similar to what you might see at the ocean's shore, with wispy clouds and a very bright but somewhat diffused golden light. That was the visual. But there is more to heaven than what we can see with our eyes. Below the surface visuals was a well of feelings fueled by love, peace, and abiding in presence that I will call spirit or God. Everything felt tied together by love and peace, and the beauty of the scenes around me was a product of this unconditional love. While the beauty of heaven took my breath away, the sense of the love completely ensnared me and made me want to stay there forever. I felt a deep sense of that love flowing through all things around me: the air, the ground below my feet, the trees, the clouds, and me. I felt the love flowing all around me, flowing through me, and eventually capturing me by the heart. I felt supported in a loving presence so powerful yet so gentle that I cried again. I had never experienced such unconditional love and acceptance in all of my years on the planet. It felt as though this place were built from love and peace on a very grand cosmic scale. Each soul might see the landscape differently, but all sensed and saw the love that formed on the basis for everything in the same way. That love and peace seemed to shine as glimmers of light beneath the surface, winking in and out of the visual sight. It had colors and sparkle and texture. It seemed to take the form of what I saw, like trees, a meadow, but at the same time it was also separate from the forms themselves. The closest I can come to explaining what heaven looked like to my feeling senses is to point you to the work of the artist Ken Elliott. His paintings come closest to capturing what I felt underlying the landscape over there. Two pieces I'll share are Soft Blue Progression. It comes the closest to showing you what the visuals look like for me as well. Yellow Wall, as well as Ken's other paintings, gives a sense of the energy or vibration of love and peace that build everything there. Please check out his website, kenelliott.com, for more examples. Well, what a beautiful description. That is all that Nancy had to share on this testimony, but she did go on to write a book that I will share in the description section below. I'll also put a link to this original testimony where she also goes on to answer some questions and answers after she shares her experience. So if you would like to read a little bit more about what she said, be sure to look in the description below. And as always, thank you for joining us. I hope that this brought you hope for what lies ahead. And if you're like me, maybe you have experienced things in life and losses that you need healing from. It is my prayer that these experiences will further aid you in your healing process, remind you of God's perfect love and perfect plan for all of our lives. Thank you for joining us. Until next time. Bye-bye.